Chapter 1527. Leaving Twilight, the chain breaker left the drowning remains of Twilight behind and turned away from the rising suns. Drifting above the currents, it traversed the dreadful battlefield and escaped into clear waters. The great river flowed below them. By now, the sight of the world in constant motion was both familiar and calming. Sunny had a feeling that returning to reality, where the ground was solid and unmoving, would be a strange experience. There were no nightmare creatures in the vicinity of Twilight, so they could relax for a few days. The members of the cohort rested and recuperated, not doing anything in particular. They slept, consumed delicious meals, and spent their time in idleness. Even Mordred's presence did not dampen the peaceful mood. He was nothing if not accommodating, even pleasant to be around. Of course, he was. True monsters knew better than anyone how to appear sympathetic and friendly, after all. And the Prince of Nothing was a singular existence even among the insidious monsters. But that was fine. Sunny did not mind sharing a ship with him, as long as Mordred was an ally. Gods knew that the cohort needed all the help it could get in this dreadful, utterly unreasonable nightmare. Sunny himself did not do much in the first few days of their journey across the great river. He slept some more, spent some time staring at the sky, and chatted with Kai, describing the past events of the nightmare in more detail. The month he had spent with Nephi's on the carcass of the black turtle, the battle with the azure serpent, their meeting with Anak and the visit to Forlorn Weave, the journey to Fallen Grace and their reunion with Cassie, the battle against the defiled Sibyl, the dreadful months they had spent on Alethia's island, and their eventual escape. In the process, Sunny also spoke about the many mysteries they had solved and the startling revelations they had received in the tomb of Ariel. Looking back, he had truly learned a lot here, both about the past and the present. And about himself. Kai was the perfect audience for his outrageous tales. Sharing his experiences with a friend soothed Sunny's conflicted heart a little. He was not quite all right. After suffering so much in Antarctica and on the Great River, how could he be? But he was at least back to being his usual spirited self. Almost. There was still the issue of what had happened at the end of Twilight to deal with. If there was a way to deal with that, even. Sunny felt that he at least owed it to himself to have a talk with Nephi's, pointless or not. But with Nephi's being in that strange, dispassionate state, talking with her about deeply emotional issues did not seem like a good idea. She was slowly recovering, at least. So, Sunny decided to wait until she was back to her usual self before broaching the topic. With that, there was nothing for him to do. Eventually, the chain breaker traveled far away from Twilight. They were still bathed in the beautiful blaze of the endless dawn, but the waters the graceful ship was braving had imperceptibly changed. They were surrounded by danger once more. From here onward, there would be untold horrors hiding beneath the waves once more. The radiant sky would harbor terrifying abominations once more. And so, the members of the cohort would have to maintain vigilance at all times once more, ready to fight for their lives. The mood aboard the chain breaker subtly changed. That said, strangely, Sunny was not too concerned. Perhaps it was arrogance, but looking at the 7 people gathered on the graceful ship, he felt confident in their chances of at least reaching Verge unharmed. Had there ever been a more deadly cohort of masters? Surely not. Kai and Effie were veterans of both the Forgotten Shore and the Antarctic campaign, with plenty of incredible feats under their belts. Soul Reaper Jet was one of the most feared individuals in the world, with even saints being wary of her sinister blade. Cassie was someone whose lethality could not even be evaluated by mundane means. And then there were Sunny, Nephi's, and Mordred, the 3 wielders of divine aspects, unheard of in history. Their individual power was already outside the scope of what masters were supposed to be capable of, and when put together. If anything, Sunny should have felt concerned for their enemies. Speaking of Mordred, Sunny had wished to avoid him entirely, but having access to the well of knowledge the Prince of Nothing possessed was simply too tempting. Granted, the bastard lied as easily as he breathed, so anything he said had to be taken with a grain of salt. In fact, as a rule of thumb, nothing Mordred said could be trusted. But Sunny still wanted to ask him a few questions, especially those that almost no one else could answer. Mordred could usually be seen at the bow of the chain breaker, where Saint stood guard with Morgan's warbow in her hands. He seemed to be very interested in the graceful stone knight, or maybe the bow she held. In any case, he could be found there most of the time. Sunny left his usual spot under the branches of the sacred tree, walked past Anank's Ketch, and approached the Prince of Nothing. Sensing his gaze, Mordred looked up. "Ah, Sunless, what a pleasant surprise. Did you want something?" Sunny glared at him for a few moments, then sighed and summoned the shadow chair. Noticing it, Mordred raised an eyebrow, as if remembering something unpleasant. "No." Sitting down, Sunny remained silent for a bit, then said evenly, "Yeah, I did want something, just to chat for a bit." He glanced at Mordred and asked, trying to keep his tone devoid of hostility, "So how is Ravenheart treating you?" The Prince of Nothing gave him a curious look. "Ah, the weather is not great, but the people are really charming. Well, you've met Sation and Beastmaster, so you must have an idea. It's like I'm living in a flower garden." Sunny smiled, nodded, and asked cordially, I see. So what are the sovereigns up to? Are they really going to abandon the waking world?" Mordred studied him with a neutral expression. Then he smiled pleasantly. "How should I know? Am I a sovereign?" Sunny stared at him silently for a few moments. Eventually, he shook his head. "No, but you are a son of one, was raised by another, and currently serve the third. If you don't know, then who would?" Mordred laughed. "Well, if you put it like that, it does sound like I should know. However, Sunless, you seem to be mistaken about something. The thing is, I don't care to know. Why should I care about the waking world? Whatever happens to it has little to do with me." Sunny frowned. Indeed, Mordred had spent most of his childhood in the dream realm, so he had little attachment to Earth. More than that, he was not someone who would care about the lives of hundreds of millions of innocent people, let alone feel inclined to do something to save them. All Mordred cared about was his revenge against the great clan Valor. A faint smile appeared on Sunny's face. "Sure, you might not care about the waking world, but you do care about your father's plans, at least as far as to be able to try and ruin them better. So cut the crap and just tell me what you know, if you don't mind." Mordred stared at him with amusement for a while, then sighed and shook his head. "Well, why not? But I'm afraid that you are overestimating me. I really do not know what my father and the Queen of Worms are planning. I am not exactly on speaking terms with the former, and the latter does not trust me enough to share such secrets. All I know is that they are serious about having a war with each other. That was why I joined Kai Song." He lingered for a moment and added, his voice losing its usual lightheartedness, "I'll warn you, though, don't presume to understand the sovereigns, Sunless. You might think that you have them figured out, but you don't. They are far older than we are and far more powerful. They are also not some cardboard villains. My father, Kai Song, and the third one are the most exceptional individuals of their generation, or maybe even of all generations. They did not end up on their thrones by accident." Sunny looked at him somberly. "What are you trying to say?" Mordred shrugged with a smile. "I'm just saying that you might find it hard to understand their plans, abandoning the waking world. Well, that surely sounds like something they would do. But if you think about it, why would they do that? Even if the sovereigns only care about the dream realm, they still need Awakened to populate it. And Awakened cannot exist without mundane people. You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs, and you can't get a stable supply of eggs without a poultry farm. Something like that." Sunny remained silent for a while, thinking about what Mordred had said. Although the terms he used were very cynical, the underlying message held true. Indeed, there had to be an immense population of mundane people for a comparatively small amount of awakened to emerge. If the waking world was indeed destined to be consumed by the dream realm, the sovereigns could not allow themselves to abandon it completely before that happened, which went against what Sonny had learned about them before. He frowned, feeling confused. Eventually, Sonny shook his head and asked, his voice somber, "What about the third one? Asterion, what does he want?" As soon as those words were spoken, Mordred's smile dimmed, growing strangely forced. He leaned forward slightly. "Sunless, do me a favor, try not to speak that name aloud. Otherwise, he might actually hear you." Sonny blinked a couple of times, staring at him incredulously. "Come on, really." Mordred let out a long sigh, then shook his head reproachfully. "I'm not saying that to scare you, I'm just telling the truth. The old man, his powers are a bit beyond comprehension. If you feel threatened by Kai's song or my father, wait till you meet him. Better yet, hope that you never will." Sonny leaned back, crossing his arms. What's so scary about him? If he's so powerful, why isn't he participating in this war song and valor started? Where is he? Come to think of it, where does he come from? There is almost nothing written about him in the history books. Is he a legacy? Does he have a clan, an army? Mordred shrugged. The thing you need to understand about him is that his domain is different from those of the other two. Yes, domains can be different in nature. Most are like what my father and Kai's song possess, territorial. That is why valor and song are fighting over territory, but not his. His is more of an idea than a place. He remained silent for a few moments, then said somberly, "You must have realized by now that the great clans were built by those who inherited the divine lineages. Valor was born from the lineage of war, immortal flame from the lineage of sun, house of night from the lineage of storm. Clan song rose to prominence later, after Kai's song discovered the lineage of beast. The old man is the one who has the lineage of heart. However, there is no clan he belongs to. Do you know why that is?" Sonny shook his head. "The lineage of Heart God. Heart God was also the god of souls, as well as emotions, memory, hunger, and growth. What kind of aspect could Asterion possess then? What powers did he wield? What was the nature of his domain?" Mordred took a deep breath, then smiled. "Well, it's because he does not come from the legacy clans. Legacy clans have been in power since before we were born, so we are conditioned to assume that it has always been like that. But in fact, there were many powers competing for the right to shape the world as they saw fit, back in the chaotic time after the spell first descended, some more terrible than others. The old man is the last remnant of one of those vanquished powers." Sonny remembered hearing about that. From what he knew, the current system, with the government and the legacy clans maintaining the world order together, was established after several other fringe factions had been defeated by the first legacies. Even with all the sins of the current regime, the ones that could have been would have been much more terrifying. At least that was what he had been told by Wake of Ruin. Mordred lingered for a moment. "Ah, by the way, the old man is not that old, actually. It's just what I call him. The faction he comes from, you see, was a small group of the Path of Ascension zealots, real fanatics, far more extreme than anyone you could have met among the legacies. Now, those people, they were really in favor of abandoning the waking world completely, believing that the nightmare spell was meant to pave the way for a new beginning, that the dream realm was a wild garden meant for a new breed of humans." He shook his head. "And they did abandon the waking world, establishing an isolated colony in the dream realm not long after the first masters ascended. The man who would one day become the third sovereign was actually born there. In fact, he was the first human child born in the dream realm, the original dream spawn." Mordred smiled. Well, in any case, those reclusive extremists did not last long. Their colony was eventually overtaken by nightmare creatures, and he was the only one who survived. In the end, he found his way to Bastion, met my father, was brought back to the waking world, and joined Broken Sword's cohort. The Prince of Nothing looked at Sunny with a strange expression, then frowned. I hope that satisfied your curiosity. Ah, all this talking made me thirsty. I think I'll go find myself something to drink. He rose and moved to walk away, but then lingered for a moment. Looking back, Mordred said in a friendly tone, "Oh, by the way, I said before that you'd better hope to never meet that guy. Sorry, I don't think you'll have a choice. The old man, you see, is very interested in people with divine bloodlines. Considering your connection to Shadow, the only missing lineage, he'll probably come find you someday. Your precious changing star as well, since there might not be another Dreamspawn anywhere in the two worlds." With that, he smiled pleasantly and walked away, leaving Sunny alone. The chain breaker continued moving west, the leaves of the sacred tree rustling gently in the wind. Sunny stared silently at the vast expanse of the great river, his head full of dark thoughts. It was really unfair. He did not even have the lineage of Shadow God. Blood Weave had greedily devoured it a long time ago. Why did he have to deal with a mysterious and sinister sovereign? It was not as if Sunny did not have a host of other terrible problems he had to deal with already. Mordred might have been lying as well. It was only then that Sunny thought back on their conversation and uttered a quiet curse. The Prince of Nothing had talked for so long, but did not give a straight answer to a single question. That bastard! A conversation with Mordred left Sunny in a somber mood. The bastard clearly knew more than he had deemed necessary to share, but the few pieces of information he did offer were concerning. However, Sunny did not dwell on the distant threat of the sovereigns for long. He did not have the luxury of worrying about something waiting far in the future when there were lethal dangers waiting for him in the present. Or past, technically, considering that Verge was situated far downstream, as close to the source and the estuary as the Seekers of Truth had been able to build it, before the defilement was born. Not long after he talked with Mordred, the chain breaker was attacked for the first time since leaving Twilight. The cohort dealt with the swarm of the drowned with comparative ease, allowing him to collect a few soul shards and for Jet to replenish her reserves of essence. After that, they maintained a battle-ready schedule at all times. Sunny's shadows stood guard at different points of the ship day and night. Nephi's and Cassie took turns steering the graceful vessel, keeping it at low altitude, sometimes just above the flowing water. Jet's Crow and Kai scouted ahead for signs of approaching danger. The most useful scout, however, was none other than Mordred. With his ability to perceive the world through reflections and the vast expanse of water around them, he could see far and wide, warning them of any suspicious movement far in advance. They did not have to fight too often. Sometimes danger came from below the water, and sometimes it came from the sky. But most of the time the great river remained calm and peaceful, leaving them with plenty of free time on their hands. Knowing that the cohort was drawing closer and closer to the inevitable attack on Verge with each passing day, Sunny threw himself into weaving. There was a lot for him to do. He had 5 Supreme Soul Shards, which meant that 5 of the transcendent memories the cohort possessed could be potentially elevated to a higher rank. The first thing Sunny had to do was choose what memories to alter. He chose the first 2 rather quickly. They were the transcendent armors Effie and Kai had received in the second nightmare, the former after slaying the Sun Prince, the latter after slaying the Ivory Lord Dragon Severax. Both were potent and possessed tremendously robust weaves, making the possibility of the alterations damaging or destroying them slim. Best of all, they were memories of the first tier, so a single soul shard was enough to change their rank completely. The third memory Sunny decided on was somewhat of a harder choice. It was the transcendent weapon of the seventh-tier Nephis had received for slaying Soul Stealer. The weapon, which could take many forms, possessed several insidious enchantments. In a sense, it was similar to the cruel sight, but much more versatile, destructive, and potent. Because of the similarities between the two silver blades, Sunny had an easier time studying its weave. Therefore, he had a better chance of transplanting a new nexus. Sadly, transplanting 7 was currently beyond his abilities, not that he had enough supreme soul shards. However, Sunny decided to attempt isolating a single enchantment and supplying that enchantment alone with the power equal to that of a supreme memory, thus creating a strange and unheard-of memory of a hybrid rank. The enchantment he chose was responsible for channeling elemental damage, as well as protecting the blade from harm. Considering Neff's propensity for destroying her memories with her own flame, or simply by exposing them to too much punishment, that single improvement would serve her very well in the future. The remaining 2 memories he decided to alter had also been received by Nephis in Twilight. Both of them were of transcendent memories of the first tier. One was an arrow, while the other was a charm. The arrow possessed a simple enchantment that enhanced the force delivered by its impact, and could also shape that force into a flat, severing field. The charm was a more complicated one, and served to enhance the material properties of other objects, making weapons sharper, armor more durable, and so on. With that arrangement, 2 of his companions would be better protected, 2 would be capable of delivering more harm to the enemy, and 1 would be able to better support the rest of the cohort in any kind of situation. With his plan set, Sunny began the work, studying the weaves of the chosen memories in great detail, creating threads of shadow essence, and preparing himself for the alterations was going to take him a long while. He hoped to be done with the process by the time they reached Fallen Grace, and if that failed, then at least before they reached Verge. Days passed with him being completely concentrated on the task. Strangely enough, studying the unfamiliar weaves also gave him some inspiration for his own unrelated project, the complicated puzzle of turning the covetous coffer into a semblance of an echo. For a while, Sunny was fully engrossed in the mysteries of weaving, not paying attention to anything else, except for occasional attacks on the chain breaker. Slowly, however, a note of dissonance invaded his focused mind. Sunny was reluctant to pay it much attention at first, but with each passing day, the worm of doubt that had entered his mind continued to grow harder to ignore. Especially because the sin of solace did not miss any opportunity to remind him of that small contradiction. The thought gnawing at Sunny's mind was a seemingly innocent question. How did Cassie survive the explosion that consumed Twilight? At first, he had not paid that detail any attention, simply being glad and relieved that the blind girl was alive. But the more time passed, the more it bothered Sunny for some reason. Except for Mordred, who had been sent back to his physical body, all members of the cohort had been thrown out of the mirror realm in approximately the same location, past the open space where they had met Soul Stealer, near the inner districts of the city. From there, Nephis had made her way to the palace. Cassie, however, had somehow ended up near the gates of the city when the explosion happened. She then dove deep into the still water beyond the gates to save herself, as well as Effie and Jet, from the obliterating blast. But how had she found herself all the way near the wall of Twilight? It had to have been immensely difficult to fight her way through the flood of Soul Stealer's vessels and the remnant abominations of the defiled horde. The distance between where the cohort had found themselves and the outer limits of the city was much greater than the distance to the palace. Cassie couldn't have reached the water by accident, so how had she done it? There was only one reasonable answer. It was that Cassie's goal had always been to escape the city. which meant that she had known what would happen all along. Sonny was restless. Cassie had survived, which brought him indescribable joy. He would have been broken if she had perished in twilight. Nephi's would have never forgiven herself for causing the death of her best friend either. Not to mention that Effie and Jet would have been killed as well, making the heartbreaking tragedy simply unbearable. So it was the epitome of wonderful that Cassie had survived. But how had she survived? He did not know. It was close to impossible for her to be driven all the way to the limits of the city by accident, which meant that she had fought her way there on purpose, which meant that she knew what would happen, which was also impossible. Not even because Cassie would have shared such precious information with them, allowing the cohort to come up with a better plan, but simply because she was not capable of perceiving the past and the future in the tomb of Ariel. She had told them so herself. All Cassie saw in her visions, ever since entering the nightmare, was darkness. That was what saved her from sharing the fate of the Sibyls, who had all been defiled by the visions of the estuary. Here in the tomb of Ariel, Cassie was blind to the future and the past. That was her saving grace. She could not have known what would happen in twilight. Otherwise, she would have been defiled, and she wasn't defiled. Sonny knew that because he could see Cassie's soul, and because she was still a carrier of the nightmare spell. And yet she had to have known somehow. It made no sense at all. Confused, he even remembered the eerie and nonsensical thought that had entered his mind after they escaped Alethia's island. That Cassie could have been able to remember the previous cycles of the Great River, just like the Mad Prince had. Which would make her torment. But she couldn't be torment for the same reason. If she was, Sonny would have been able to see the darkness of corruption in her soul, and the spell would have banished her from itself. The strange incongruity gnawed at him more and more with each passing day. The only reasonable explanation was that fate had played a trick on them. It was almost impossible for Cassie to have found herself near the gates of twilight when the explosion happened, but only almost. She must have gotten incredibly lucky. Sonny was no stranger to witnessing extremely improbable events. His entire life was full of them due to his fated attribute. This time, they must have received a blessing of fortune. There was no other sensible way to explain what had happened. And still, he was restless, plagued by doubt. It was to the point that Sonny was having trouble concentrating on weaving. He found himself glancing at Cassie furtively when she was nearby, and then felt ashamed for doubting one of his companions. Not to mention that it was absolutely useless to try and spy on the blind girl secretly, because she could have been watching the world through his eyes and would be aware of him looking at her. In any case, Cassie seemed to be perfectly normal. Well, as far as the word normal could be applied to her. She was mostly quiet, but not alarmingly so. She usually kept to herself, but not to the point of avoiding others on purpose. Usually, she would take her turn controlling the chain breaker, then descend below deck to rest when Nephi's replaced her on the steering oars. When they were attacked, she participated in the battles, supporting the cohort from behind and stepping forward if there was a need. When everything was calm, she rested and went about her usual duties of maintaining the ship. Of course, Sonny did not know what she was doing when nobody was watching. How could he? Well, actually, he could. Spying on the blind seer was not an easy matter, considering that she could see through the eyes of the potential spy and knew their every move. However, as far as Sonny knew, while Cassie could use her ascended ability on the members of the cohort, she could not do the same with his shadows. She could also see through his eyes if she wished to, but she could not see what he saw through the shadows. So, if he wanted to, he could send one of the shadows to observe the blind girl, just in case there was something strange going on with her. However, he wasn't sure that it was an appropriate thing to do. Sonny was very peculiar about trust. It had taken him a long time to gain the ability to trust others, so he cherished it greatly. Being able to trust and receiving trust in return, those were intangible but precious things. So, even if sending a shadow to observe Cassie wouldn't do the blind girl any harm, he would be breaking trust with her. Their relationship was complicated and tumultuous, and they had endured a lot together to repair it. He was reluctant to jeopardize that relationship. But the sin of Solace kept whispering into his ear, fanning the flames of Sunny's paranoia. In fact, the Sword Wraith did not whisper, but was incredibly loud with his insidious accusations and insinuations, especially so when Cassie was nearby. She never reacted, which made it seem as though she was unable to hear the odious apparition, or was pretending to not hear it masterfully. Just think about it rationally. It was hard for Sunny to be dispassionate when it came to Cassie, but this time he had to be. We only made it this far because of Cassie, but if I remove our friendship from the equation, she has indeed been behaving strangely, and there are certain things about her actions that can be seen as suspicious if a stranger evaluates them. Which did not mean that they really were suspicious, just that they could be. Lowering all 6 of his hands, which had been weaving strings of shadow essence, Sunny frowned. In the end, it all comes down to a simple question. Do I want to be polite, or do I want to be safe? Seen in that light, his dilemma had a definitive solution. It was much better to be safe than sorry. After shaking his head, Sunny secretly sent one of his shadows to keep an eye on Cassie. He was almost entirely certain that he would not discover anything concerning. But at least the little part of him that had been restless and concerned was calmed by that precaution, allowing him to return to his tasks with an easy heart. He continued weaving. With his mind at ease, Sunny was able to get back to weaving. Due to the crown of twilight, he did not have to worry about running out of essence, and created threads of it with increasing speed. The sight of him sitting all by himself, moving 2 sets of shadows' hands in addition to his own pair, must have been extremely strange, especially because his companions could not see the tenebrous strings wrapped around his many fingers. But they were long used to the strange things Sunny did from time to time, so he was mostly left alone. The chain breaker sailed duskward, slowly leaving the waters of endless dawn behind. At the same time, Sunny was observing Cassie. The blind girl did not do anything suspicious, assuaging his fears. Despite the poisonous accusations the sin of Solace kept spouting into his ears, she was perfectly normal. Cassie spent half of the day steering the flying ship, then went about mundane tasks or rested in her cabin. She maintained a calm and friendly demeanor while spending time with the other members of the cohort, albeit remaining slightly aloof. Cassie had become rather taciturn at some point, but it was not as if she was reticent and went out of her way to not participate in any conversations. It was just that she seemed content to listen quietly, most of the time, only voicing her opinions when there was a reason. When Cassie was alone, she remained composed and collected. There was not much to do on the peaceful days, but she was seldomly idle. Without anyone noticing, the blind girl had taken it upon herself to maintain the ship in pristine condition. Others had joined her belatedly, sharing the chores and menial tasks while chattering and joking. The atmosphere on the washed decks of the chain breaker was harmonious and tranquil. Cassie was only alone when she retreated to her cabin to sleep. Sunny felt more than a little bit guilty, even when sending his shadow to spy on the blind girl there. Of course, he made sure to look away when needed so as not to see anything improper. But still, it was a strange situation. Luckily, Cassie was not doing anything to give credence to the insinuations made by the sin of Solace. The only peculiar thing Sunny discovered was that she had developed the habit of keeping a diary at some point. The blind girl had brought a leather-bound journal with her when they departed Fallen Grace, and was diligently leaving short notes on its pages before sleep. Sonny did not really want to read what she wrote, though. He wouldn't have been able to read the journal even if he wanted to, anyway. Not because Cassie did anything to make it hard for someone to gain access to it, but simply because she wrote in Braille. Apart from the leather-bound book, she had also brought a special slotted slate. The slate, which had probably been specially made for her by an artisan in fallen grace, consisted of two parts connected by a hinge. By opening the slate, Cassie could place a sheet of paper inside and then poke holes in it with a stylus by following the slots. Because of how proficient Cassie was with handling her flaw, it was sometimes easy to forget that she was blind. But she was. Her aspect abilities might have allowed her to negate some of the most debilitating sides of her condition, but the underlying cause remained. When Cassie was alone, she could not borrow someone's vision to see the page. Her ability to sense what would happen a few moments into the future could not help her see the path of ink on paper, either. So, in these private moments, she could only use such a method to read and write. Separated from her by several bulkheads and the mass of the upper deck, Sonny looked away from the shimmering spellweave and gazed at the beautiful sky above him. It was painted with a million vivid colors, rays of sunshine falling through the radiant clouds. The leaves of the sacred tree moved gently, making the tapestry of shadows etched into the wooden surface of the deck shift. Looking down, he sighed quietly and returned to his task. Days passed slowly. Eventually, they left the reaches of the great river where dawn never ended. The sky gradually brightened, turning vast and perfectly blue. The nights were longer here, with water glowing softly in the absolute darkness of the absent stars. As the great river changed, the people sailing across its endlessly flowing surface changed, as well. Kai finally did not seem disoriented anymore, having come to terms with the bizarre and incredible truth of the third nightmare. He quietly trained and prepared himself for the nearing battle, perhaps feeling remorseful about not sharing the hardships his friends had endured. Jet was practicing and experimenting with her mist blade, capturing new souls every time the chain breaker was attacked. She was slowly figuring out how to use her deadly weapon to achieve truly harrowing results, which sometimes chilled even her allies. Effie's belly was slowly growing. She spent most of her time helping the other members of the cohort with their tasks and preparing meals. The huntress remained cheerful and seemingly carefree, but Sonny could see somber emotions hiding behind that bright facade. She was distressed about the future of her child, and troubled because she was not able to support her comrades more. Mordred was Mordred. It was impossible to tell what the bastard was thinking or feeling, but he seemed perfectly content with the situation. The only thing that bothered him was that there were not enough living beings for him to kill, which prevented him from forming more soul cores, creating reflections, and then sending the reflections to slaughter and rampage on their own, thus nurturing their power. Cassie remained her usual, unassuming self. Even with Sonny watching her closely, there was nothing especially notable about the blind girl. If anything, she seemed to be slowly growing more confident and energetic the further from Twilight they traveled. And then there was Nephi's. It took a few weeks for her to recover from suffering the terrible torment of her flaw and return to her usual self. Her eyes had regained their former liveliness, and her demeanor had shed the dispassionate emotionlessness of having her humanity burn away in the merciless flames. Sonny felt relieved that Nephi's was back to being herself, but he was also tense and troubled. Because now that she was, he had no excuses to not talk to her anymore. After an especially fierce battle against a swarm of aerial abominations, the deck of the chain breaker was slick with blood. Fiend was sitting near a pile of grotesque corpses, munching on them with shining eyes. The disturbing crunching sound spread far and wide, making the members of the cohort throw disgusted looks at him. The ravenous ogre paid it no attention, continuing his morbid meal in utter delight. The flying ship had landed on the water, and was now swaying gently on the waves. Its sails were filled with wind, and steered by Neff's steady hand, it moved swiftly across the current. Sonny had just finished inspecting the hull of the chain breaker to check if it had received any damage. Apart from a couple shallow scratches, everything seemed fine. Relieved, he gave Cassie the sign that it was all right, and went about helping Kai wash the blood off the deck. The motions of cleaning the ship up after a battle were so familiar by now that he could have performed them with his eyes closed and his shadows gone. Eventually, everything that needed to be done was done. The pile of corpses had disappeared, consumed by Fiend. The soul shards had been recovered and cleaned. The deck had been washed. The sails and masts had been checked. The members of the cohort returned to what they had been doing before the nightmare creatures attacked. Effie was already starting to prepare dinner, and a delicious smell wafted from the galley. The 7 sons were falling toward the horizon. Instead of returning to his usual spot and manifesting shadow hands to continue weaving threads of essence, Sonny hesitated for a while, then made his way toward the stern of the ship. There, Nephi's was standing in the runic circle, holding the steering oars. He leaned against the railing nearby and summoned the endless spring, taking a sip of the invigorating water. They spent some time in silence. The silence between them had been comfortable once, but now it was making Sonny feel burdened. Eventually he asked, "How long do you think it will take us to reach Fallen Grace?" Nephi's looked at the sky, then shrugged. 5 weeks, maybe 6, depends on the wind and the obstacles we'll meet along the way. He nodded. All in all, 2 months would have passed since the day they left Twilight by the time Fallen Grace appeared in sight, which meant that he would have spent around 9 in the nightmare. The same went for Nephi's, while Cassie would be closing in on having been in the tomb of Ariel for the better part of 2 years. It would be 5 months for Effie and Jet, and 2 for Kai. What a mess. Sonny wasn't even sure how old he was exactly, anymore, especially in relation to the other members of the cohort. He was still shy of turning 22 by several months, at least. After thinking about that for a bit, he asked, "How do you think the people in Fallen Grace are doing?" The citizens of Fallen Grace had been supposed to migrate it downstream after the news of the defiled Sibyl's demise reached them. That would have allowed them to regain their youth, and maybe even usher in a new generation, with time. But since Sonny, Nephi's, and Cassie had not bothered to stay back and check, there was no telling what actually happened. "I wonder how that brat Kronos is doing." Nephi sighed. "It's impossible to tell. After all, we don't know how much time we spent on Alethia's island and to traverse the vortex." That was true, as well. Sonny only knew how many revolutions he endured after becoming aware of them, not how many deaths it had taken for him to learn the truth of the loop. Time had also acted extremely strangely in the depths of the great river, when they were traveling through the vortex, and in the dark void beyond. In a sense, the only member of the group who had experienced each day of the nightmare normally, from start to finish, was Mordred. But even he had no idea how long it had been since they entered the tomb of Ariel, or rather, since they started this cycle of the great river, because it was close to impossible to track the passage of time in the reflected version of Twilight, where it had been frozen. All he knew was that he had played cat and mouse with Soul Stealer for a very long time before the chain breaker arrived. Sonny remained silent for a while, trying to choose the correct words, but they weren't coming. What was the point of words anyway? If their troubles could be solved with words, they would have solved them a long time ago. Words were cheap, and actions spoke louder. Some problems could not be solved at all. He winced, then said the first thing that came to his mind. "I wonder how that brat Kronos is." "I'm sorry." Neff's voice interrupted him, making Sonny flinch slightly. He glanced at her, surprised. Nephi's was looking ahead at the horizon. Her motionless face was painted by the light of the descending suns. She remained silent for a moment, then sighed and turned to face him. "I am sorry for making you dismiss your crown." Sunny did not answer immediately. He kept quiet for a while, studying her face. His own expression was neutral, not exposing any of the swarm of emotions hiding behind it. There it was, an apology. The conversation he had been delaying went much smoother than he had expected, arriving at what could very well be considered the best possible outcome. But it did not solve anything. So what if Nephis was sorry? It did not change what she had done. It did not change what she could do in the future either. They could discuss it endlessly, expressing their reasons, feelings, intentions, and desires. But that fundamental truth would not change, making all else meaningless. Perhaps it was just like the sin of Solace had said. The only way to resolve this issue was for Sunny to surrender. But he did not know how to, and did not wish to surrender either. Eventually, Sunny sighed as well. Looking away, he nodded. "Yeah, I am sorry that you did that too." With that, he forced out a smile. His smile was unconvincing and a little joyless. "But hey, what else were you supposed to do? At least you helped me save face. You might not have known it, but I was moments away from trying to bite you. That would have been really embarrassing, not to mention bad for my teeth." Sunny shook his head and pushed himself off the railing. "Dinner is almost ready, so I'd better go. Cassie will take over from you soon. Come down before the food gets cold." He waved at her and left. The first of the 7 suns fell into the great river, drowning in its unfathomable depths. Far behind them, the sky was already turning dark. The chain breaker continued sailing in the direction of the distant sunset. Chain breaker was sailing across the vast expanse of the great river. With each day, the time of their inevitable arrival at Verge drew closer. Torment was waiting there, as well as the remnants of the defiled horde, all dreadful and powerful adversaries, without a doubt. Sunny felt a strange melancholy settle in his burdened heart, something he did not want to carry and could not afford to feel. His mind had to be focused on the preparations for the nearing battle. The battle that was going to decide whether they would return home as saints or be buried forever in the dreadful darkness of the tomb of Ariel. So he did what he did best. He put his feelings aside and got to work. 5 memories waited for him to alter them, each possessing a unique and complicated weave. Each was different from the Crown of Dawn and called for a different approach. The suits of armor Effie and Kai had received for slaying the 2 chain lords of the Ivory City were the easiest to deal with. Armor was meant to be durable, after all, and perhaps for that reason, the weaves of these memories was robust and durable as well. Or maybe it was simply because of where they came from. In any case, Sunny had a good feeling about altering the memories left behind by the 2 immortal saints. The deadly arrow and the helpful charm Nephis had received in Twilight were much more complicated. They were entirely different from each other as well, which made the task of studying the weave of their enchantments harder. But the most troublesome memory by far was the transcendent weapon of the 7th tier Nephis had received for slaying Soul Stealer. Not only was the weave of the silver blade infinitely more complex, but Sunny was also trying to do something he had never done before, replace a single nexus of a greater memory, and enhance only one of its enchantments, leaving the rest untouched. More than that, the weave of the altered enchantment had to be completely isolated, so that the pressure of its more potent essence did not break the balance of the entire tapestry. The elaborate puzzle of it all was driving him insane. Finding countless solutions to a myriad of problems demanded all of his attention. Which was good. Sunny enjoyed being faced with problems that could actually be solved. He also liked not being able to dwell on other things too much, focusing entirely on a single task. Days passed, turning into weeks. The chain breaker braved the vast expanse of the azure sky, and finally entered the reaches of the great river, where the world was eternally bathed in the crimson radiance of dusk. They fought plenty of harrowing nightmare creatures on the way. Sonny was somewhat forced to swallow his previous confidence. Yes, nothing managed to defeat the cohort or gravely wound any of the seven masters, but they came close to being defeated on more than one occasion. One time, the impregnable hull of the chain breaker was even breached. Luckily, they were flying above the currents at the time, so the ship did not take any water. But having to hastily patch the damaged section in the middle of a prolonged battle made everyone remember why arrogance was the quickest way to die in the unforgiving world of the nightmare spell. Not long before the second month of their journey came to an end, Sonny finally finished his work on the two suits of armor. Effie and Kai each had a supreme memory to protect them now, while Jet had her legacy relic. This made him feel better about the terrible battle that waited for them ahead. Most of the preparatory work for the other three alterations had been complete, too. Sonny had plenty of essence strings at his disposal, as well as detailed knowledge of each of the three weaves. All that remained now was to carefully go over his plans, envision every step, and try to predict what could go wrong. That was going to take him some time, but before that happened, the chain breaker finally arrived at Fallen Grace. The arrival this time was different from the first. Back then, neither Sonny nor Nephi's had known what to expect from the last human city on the Great River. Therefore, they had been wary and ready for battle. He had even chosen to assume the form of the onyx serpent, following the graceful vessel from below the waves. Many things were different now. The chain breaker was soaring above the water instead of resting on the currents. There were more people aboard. Fallen Grace itself was different, too. Not only did it feel like an island of safety and peace in the ocean of perilous danger, but the city had also changed visibly. It had indeed migrated further downstream, allowing the citizens to gain back their vitality. The first time Sonny and Nephi saw Fallen Grace, it was like a wilting white flower that floated on the crimson waves, bathed in the intense glow of the setting suns. There were still signs of deterioration hidden behind its beauty, but the white flower did not seem like it was dying anymore. Instead, it looked to be recovering from a cured disease. Many of the weathered buildings were being repaired. The sea of scarlet sails that helped Fallen Grace stay in place seemed freshly dyed. The island ships were connected by solid bridges, and a few new ones were being constructed at the edges of the city, with countless people working on their unfinished frames. Above all else, the atmosphere of the last city had entirely changed. If it had been somber and stifled before, now it was brimming with vigor and vitality. It was as if people who had no hope had suddenly regained belief in the future. Seeing Fallen Grace like this was a stark reminder for Sonny, a reminder of what it was that they were fighting for. Even though he had almost forgotten, they weren't fighting against the defilement to merely survive, or even to conquer the nightmare and become saints. They were fighting for these people. Their defeat would mean the end of the river civilization, while their triumph would give the people of Fallen Grace a chance to rebuild and thrive once again. Even if these men and women were merely phantoms conjured by the spell, their joys and sorrows mattered. But more than that, they were a symbol of similar cities back in the waking world. The elegant canals of Fallen Grace were no different from the bustling streets on NQSC. Making sure that they would not turn empty and desolate, that was the calling of the awakened. The change that had happened to this floating city served to illustrate what the triumphs or failures of Awakened truly meant. Standing on the deck of the chain breaker, Sonny took a deep breath. We will destroy Verge and conquer this nightmare. He had promised to do so. He had promised to do so thrice. Soon, he would have the chance to make good on his promise. The chain breaker landed on the water and cut across its surface, approaching a familiar pier. Just like in the past, there was a crowd of people watching the graceful ship approach. Sonny remembered the last time he had seen these people. It was when he, Nephi's, and Cassie were departing from Fallen Grace, on their route to find and rescue the other members of the cohort. Thousands of gaunt, solemn old men and women had gathered on the piers on that day to see Dusk, their protector and savior, leave. Perhaps to never return. What was it that Cassie had said back then, after breaking her golden chains in a striking and decisive manner? She had said that they would gather powerful outsiders, vanquish the defilement, and usher in a new era, an era of freedom and grace, that she knew it to be true. Sonny had been a bit surprised by her impassioned proclamation and jokingly asked if she had seen a vision of fate, to which Cassie had responded, "Who cares about fate? If fate is against us, we'll break it." As if it was easy to break fate. Looking back, that speech was really out of character for the quiet, reserved young woman. Sure, she had been putting on a show to give the people of Fallen Grace hope. But why did it seem that Cassie had been much more alive, much more herself in those few moments than ever since? Sonny sighed, feeling a tentative smile find its way to his face. Well, she had not been wrong. They had indeed gathered powerful outsiders against all odds. 3 masters had left Fallen Grace, but 7 of them returned, which might not have seemed like much if one did not know what they had gone through to reach that conclusion. Much more important was the fact that, while their number had swelled, the number of their enemies had dwindled. Devouring Beast, Undying Slaughter, Soul Stealer, and the Dread Lord were gone. The Mad Prince was gone too, and so only one of the 6 plagues remained. Would Cassie's promise to vanquish the defilement come true as well? "We'll make it come true." Feeling a newfound sense of determination, Sonny looked at the people crowding the pier. Now that the chain breaker had drawn closer, he could see them better. Even though he knew what to expect, the sight still startled him. Huh. Gone were the gaunt, wrinkled faces. Gone were the hunched backs, blurry eyes, and lifeless white hair. Instead of thousands of old men and women, thousands of vigorous youths were staring back at him, their bright eyes full of vibrancy and life. "It's Lady Dusk, Our Lady. Our Lady has returned. Look, that is Lord Sunless, they're back. Was that ship flying? There are people on the deck." The wind brought over a choir of excited voices. Kai, who was standing near Sonny, gave him an amused look and smiled. "Why do I feel like I'm preparing for the opening song of a comeback concert?" The charming archer scratched the back of his head and added in a confused tone, It must be because there's a crowd of excited teenagers in front of me. Old instincts are kicking in." Sonny gave him a strange look, remembering that his friend's life was perhaps the strangest of everyone aboard the chain breaker. And that was saying a lot, considering that there was a dead woman and Mordred among them. Finally, the chain breaker reached the pier. The ship was tied in place, and then a wooden gangway was lowered to allow its passengers to disembark. Cassie descended first, causing the crowd of people to explode with cheers. The citizens of Fallen Grace seemed beyond themselves at the sight of their Sibyl. Their youthful faces were beaming with wide smiles, and their eyes glowed with excitement. However, they were also full of curiosity, which was why their gazes moved away from the blind girl soon. It was not every day that outsiders came to Fallen Grace. In fact, many or even most of these people had only seen such an event once. Recognizing Sonny and Nephi's, the crowd exploded with cheers once more. Sonny felt a little overwhelmed by that warm welcome. Then, the youths gathered at the pier looked at the other members of the cohort curiously. Kai caused a bit of a stir in the crowd, just as expected. Wearing his ivory armor with his auburn hair tousled by the wind and an irresistible smile on his face, the charming archer waved shyly at the youths, causing many to sway. The warmth of his smile was in sharp contrast to the chilly aura emanated by Jet. Wearing a cold expression, She walked down the gangway and pierced the crowd with a grim look of her icy blue eyes. The volume of the cheers died down a little, but a different kind of gleam ignited in the eyes of many people, especially the young men. Sonny shook his head, knowing precisely how they felt. Mordred's appearance also caused a strong reaction. Although not as charming as Kai and not as striking as Jet, he was nevertheless the most enigmatic and mysterious of the group. His easy smile, mirror-like eyes, and the slight feeling of wrongness hiding in their reflective depths made for a magnetic impression. If only these people knew that they were looking at a deranged monster who would not hesitate to slaughter them all to form a few soul cores, as long as he could get away with it. Strangely enough, though, the most memorable impression was not made by Kai, Jet, or Mordred, nor was it made by Cassie, Sonny, or Nephi's. Instead, it was Effie who elicited the strongest reaction from the people of Fallen Grace. After 2 months of sailing across the great river, her belly grew even larger than it had been before. The boisterous huntress had lost most of her former poise and grace. In fact, simply walking was tough for her. Supporting her belly with one hand and using a spear as a walking staff with another, Effie cautiously descended the gangway and looked at the crowd of youths with a bright smile. Her appearance caused all of them to grow silent. Sonny could not understand why at first, but then realized that the people of Fallen Grace must not have seen a pregnant woman in a long, long time. Before, they were banished upstream, turning old and decrepit. In fact, they must not have seen anything like that for a while before that. As well, among the river people, pregnant women could only be seen in the House of Youth. Looking at Effie must have been like looking at the promise of having a future for them. The huntress leaned toward Sonny and whispered, her smile becoming a little strained. "Doofus, why are they all staring at me?" He cleared his throat, not knowing how exactly to answer that question. Eventually, Sonny said, "It's because they are happy." Effie chuckled. "Oh." She turned to the crowd and waved. "I guess I should be happy then, too." The members of the cohort were standing on the pier, surrounded by a crowd of people. Because of how strange the lives of the Riverborn were, all these people seemed to be very young. Sonny was not that old himself, and yet he couldn't help but feel that he was a seasoned elder looking at countless children. The glint of awe and admiration in their eyes did nothing to lessen the impression. He remained motionless for a few moments, feeling strangely burdened by their gazes. The members of the cohort had different reactions to the warm welcome they received from the citizens of Falling Grace, ranging from nonchalance to embarrassment. It was at that moment that Cassie took a step forward and spoke, her voice rising above the crowd. "People of Fallen Grace, after being apart for so long, we finally meet again." She smiled, and the crowd of youths exploded with exhilarated cheers. The blind seer leaned on her white staff, waiting for them to calm down, then raised it slightly. "I am Dusk of Fallen Grace, and today I return home bearing the sacred relic of our city, the guiding light bestowed upon us by the gods themselves." Sonny felt a bit odd observing her speak to her people. The sight of Cassie right now was so different from how she had been before. He knew it better than anyone else, because his shadow had been following the blind girl for the past 2 months. Cassie was usually quiet, reserved, and unassuming. Even when surrounded by people, her presence was subtle to the point of being unnoticeable, sometimes making it hard to remember that the blind girl was there. That was only because Sonny was accustomed to her company, of course. Most people would find it hard to ignore the presence of such an exquisitely beautiful ascended. Still, Cassie was not someone who enjoyed attention. On the contrary, she seemed to be in the habit of avoiding it, which was why he felt strange watching her command the attention of a large crowd, and do it so seamlessly at that. Cassie played the role of a confident leader so effortlessly that it made him question what other parts of her personality were an act. "Calm down. That is the sin of Solace talking, not you." Unaware of his thoughts, the blind girl lowered the guiding light and continued, the crowd hanging on her every word. "I return in the company of mighty outsiders as well. These brave warriors have come from all across the great river to help us battle against the vile curse of the defilement. Please, help me welcome them to fallen grace, the last stronghold of humanity under the seven suns." She turned slightly and gestured to the members of the cohort, calling out their names one after another. "I bring Nightingale, the dragon slayer who felled the harrowing dread lord. I bring Jet, the soul reaper who put an end to undying slaughter. I bring Lady Nephis, the changing star, whose holy flames vanquished Soul Stealer. I bring Mordred, the valiant prince of a distant land, and Huntress Athena, whose spear always strikes true." She faced Sunny. Did he imagine it, or had her expression changed subtly for a fleeting moment? "And Lord Sunless, the heir of the Serpent King, who broke the chains of time and brought down the dreadful citadel of the First Seeker." What the hell? Sunny was a bit surprised by that introduction. Yes, he wore the crown of King Daron, and yes, he had technically played a vital part in destroying Alethia's island, which used to be the stronghold of the woman who had become known as the First Seeker. But wasn't that a little bit too much? Cassie, meanwhile, turned back to the crowd. "The Dread Lord is no more. Undying Slaughter is no more. Soul Stealer is no more. Devouring Beast is no more, and so is the Mad Prince. The heroes standing in front of you have already dealt a decisive blow to the harrowing forces of the defilement, spilling the profane blood of its most dreadful champions." She paused for a moment, and then continued, her voice swelling with confidence and passion. "And just like we broke and vanquished the plagues, we will break the walls of Verge and vanquish the First Seeker. We will destroy the source of the defilement and bring peace to the great river, allowing human cities to flourish once more. I, Dusk of Fallen Grace, promise this to you." If the crowd of youths was excited and elated before, Cassie's impassioned speech truly made their hearts ignite. A wave of voices slammed into the cohort like a tide, echoing above the waves. Even Sunny couldn't help but feel the impact of the blind girl's words. He had already known everything she shared with the people of Fallen Grace, and yet, presented in such a light, the situation truly did seem worthy of being celebrated. Had he allowed his pessimism to get the better of him? No, he had not. Cassie might have wanted to reassure these poor people who had been at the mercy of the great river for so long, but he knew better. Sure, 5 of the 6 plagues were no more, and sure, the cohort had a perfect weapon against the horrid power of the First Seeker, Nephis, but the nightmare was far from over still. Torment remained, and so did the remnant forces of the defilement under her command. Verge still existed, somewhere far away. It was where the defilement had started, and would therefore be the most harrowing of all the places they had visited on the great river, without a doubt. But still, perhaps he could allow himself to relax and believe in a better future, at least for a day. Looking at the sea of delighted youths, Sunny took a deep breath and smiled. There won't be opportunities to smile and celebrate later, so I better take this chance to enjoy some peace. Leaning down a little, he whispered in Cassie's ear. "Since when are you so good at addressing crowds?" She remained silent for a moment. "Since I found myself in charge of a crowded city, I guess." Smiling, Cassie shook her head and took a step forward. The mass of people parted before her like a sea. There was a squad of soldiers on the pier as well, all wearing white armor tied at the waist with red sashes. Unlike the last time Sunny had seen them, the warriors filled their armor well, brimming with vigor and vitality. Their captain was a tall, beautiful woman with fiery red hair. Sunny only recognized her because of an open helmet with a scarlet plume she was holding on the bend of her right arm. She was the captain that had escorted him and Nephis to the temple the last time around. She had seemed ancient then, Now she looked not much older than they were. Everyone here did, really, or even younger. The startling change was still making him feel a little dizzy. Sonny had known, of course, that killing the defiled Sybil would allow fallen Grace to migrate downstream and return these people their youth. Knowing and seeing were two different things, however. Seeing them like this was a bit bittersweet. Sweet because it was nice to witness his actions doing some good, bitter because it reminded him of Anak. As Sonny was pondering the strange reality of living on the great river, the soldiers created a passage through the crowd and surrounded the members of the cohort, helping them leave the pier. They were escorted along the familiar streets once again, moving toward the Temple of Dusk. There had been a lot of people on the pier, but there were even more here, crowding the sidewalks and the roofs of the buildings, all staring at the returned outsiders with excitement and awe. The crowd followed the small procession, constantly growing. Some people were calling out to Cassie, some simply cheered from a distance. After the relative tranquility of months spent at sea, Sonny was having trouble adjusting to the boisterous atmosphere of falling Grace. Lord Sunless, Lord Sunless. He turned his head, hearing his own name. The voice was unfamiliar, and the face of the scrawny teenager calling out to him was unfamiliar, too. But Sonny recognized those curious, intelligent eyes almost immediately. He frowned slightly, but was actually amused. "Kronos, is that you, brat?" The teenager, who had been kept away by the captain of the soldiers, grinned. "Yes, it's me, Lord Sunless, welcome back." Sonny smiled, then nodded at the captain, signaling that it was all right to let the young man approach. A few moments later, Kronos joined the procession and looked at the other members of the cohort with wide eyes. "Lord Sunless, are these outsiders as well?" Sonny nodded. "Sure, that one I found in a well once. That one is a freeloader who likes to invite herself into other people's houses. That one is in the habit of giving young men like us weighty slaps, so be on guard around her. Oh, and that one is a monster wearing human skin. Don't trust anything he says and never look him in the eyes. They are all incredible warriors, though. There is no one more qualified to fight the defiled here in the tomb of Ariel, that's for sure." Hearing those descriptions, the members of the cohort gave him sour looks. Effie shook her head. "How come Cassie's introductions are so much better?" Kronos stared at her belly with a curious gaze. Noticing it, she grinned. "What do I need to give another talk? No, wait. You can be 100 years old for all I know. How old are you, kid?" The teenager chuckled awkwardly. "Oh, I'm 18, my lady. Sorry, I didn't mean to stare." 18. The last time Sonny had seen Kronos, he had been 17, so they had not spent that much time away, much less than he feared at least. It had been no more than a month of two, at most, before he remembered himself on Alethia's island. The teenager, meanwhile, blushed in embarrassment. "It's just that my wife and we were thinking of going to the House of Youth ourselves, since it was rebuilt recently. But it's probably not a good idea still." Hearing that, Sonny almost stumbled. "What, wait, since when do you have a wife?" Kronos laughed again. "Right, you don't know. Well, we knew each other for a while. But since we were both old and decrepit, there was no point in anything except for quiet friendship between two elderly folk. Once the city migrated downstream, and we were both suddenly young once again, well, one thing led to another." He scratched the back of his head bashfully. "Actually, there are many new families in Fallen Grace. We all thought for a long time that we would be the last generation of the river people. But now, it's a bit strange. People are actually looking forward to the future." The captain of the soldiers, who had been listening to the conversation silently, gave him a reproachful look. "You are too young to go to the House of Youth, brat. In fact, you should still be in the House of Youth, not as a parent but as a child. Spend a few decades growing up before thinking about acting like an adult and starting a family." She seemed to be from a generation that had experienced things properly, unlike Kronos, who had turned into an old man before reaching adulthood and was only now learning how to be young. Effie observed them with a perplexed expression, then glanced at Sunny and winked. "You hear that, doofus? This guy is 18 and has already proposed to his girlfriend. What were you doing at 18? Sunny gave her a dubious look. "You should remember it well, no. I had just helped Nephi's win a bloody civil war, and then led all the surviving dreamers of the Dark City to safety, while the sky was more or less literally falling on our heads." Kronos stared at him incredulously for a moment, then suddenly asked, his voice full of curiosity, "How terrible, does the sky fall often outside?" Effie laughed. "More often than you would think, when this guy is around." Eventually, the cohort reached the familiar island ship that carried a beautiful palace of white stone, the Temple of Dusk. Sunny had spent enough time under its roof to feel a hint of nostalgia at the sight of it. That was where he and Nephi's had felt both hopeful and wary before their first meeting with the fabled Sibyl of Fallen Grace, only to meet Cassie instead. The blind girl's 2 ascended guards were waiting for them at the entrance to the temple. Unlike the other citizens, they had not changed as drastically. Both looked much younger, true, but were still mature and taciturn. Their composed faces did not betray any emotion when they bowed deeply to Cassie, but he could sense the deep care and reverence in their gazes. Despite that, the 2 seasoned warriors still wielded the macabre symbols of their duty to not only protect their lady from any danger, but also protect the city from the lady, if need be. The woman wielded an unsheathed greatsword, while the man held a crimson silk cord. Cassie greeted them both warmly, not paying any attention to the tools they were prepared to use to end her life. With that, the cohort was ushered to a hall where a feast had already been prepared. The leaders of the different forces within the city were gathered there, waiting to meet their returned ruler, and the champions she had brought back from her journey. The next few hours were a bit tedious for Sunny. He enjoyed the food and the beverages while listening silently to the conversation. They had been gone from Fallen Grace for just shy of 8 months. Around 1 month had been spent to reach Alethia's island, 3 or 4 to escape it, 1 more to reach Twilight, and the last 2 months to come back. During that time, the city had migrated downstream after receiving the news that the defiled Sibyl and her drowned minions were eliminated. There had been no major attacks on Fallen Grace since, although the awakened warriors left to protect it, and a few masters as well, including the 2 deaf guards, had fought against many wandering nightmare creatures. Luckily, those had been feral abominations, not war parties of the defiled. The defenders of the city had been able to either slay or chase the monsters away without letting them damage the island ships. Fallen Grace was indeed doing much better than it had when Sunny and Nephi's first reached it. That was already apparent after their walk to the temple, simply from all the activity and repair work they had noticed on the streets. The city felt invigorated. The reports of the leaders of the city only confirmed what they already knew. Cassie seemed gratified to hear that Fallen Grace, which she had cared for in solitude for an entire year, was doing well. A rare bright smile found its way onto her face, reminding Sunny of how earnest and soft-hearted the blind girl had been once, a long time ago. In turn, she shared the story of their journey, a somewhat simplified and embellished version of it, at least, with the leaders of Fallen Grace. Then came the part of the conversation that these people had been waiting for with bated breaths. Without wasting any time, Cassie announced that she would be departing again shortly. This time, to lead the group of outsiders she had gathered to attack Verge and rid the great river of the curse of the defilement once and for all. The people gathered in the hall seemed stunned to hear that. Not only were they struggling to conceive of the fact that such a thing was even possible, they were also startled and heartbroken to learn that their lady would be leaving mere days after returning home from a long and harrowing journey. But there was no way around it. The cohort was determined to only spend as much time in fallen grace as was needed to perform light repairs on the chain breaker, a week, at most. There was no point in staying longer. It would only give Torment, who was a potent seer herself, more time to prepare for their arrival. More than that, they were on a timer. Effie's pregnancy was nearing the end stage. She was already close to 8 months along. If they lingered in fallen grace, her child could be born on the way to Verge. Nobody knew if the child conceived in the waking world would become riverborn or not, so they did not want to risk it. "I see that you are concerned." Cassie's voice was soft as she addressed her people. "And although you hide it well, you are also frightened that after I leave this time, you will never see me again, that this will be our final farewell." She smiled gently. "You might very well be right. I might never return." Her words caused a deathly silence to settle in the hall. The people of fallen grace were looking at their Sibyl with complicated expressions, a storm of emotions raging in their eyes. Sunny suppressed the desire to sigh. It was true that Cassie would never return. Whether they lived or died, she would never see these people again, because victory in Verge meant the end of the nightmare. Once the first seeker was destroyed, the cohort would go back to the waking world. And the inhabitants of the nightmare, actually, Sunny did not know what would happen to them. Perhaps would they cease to exist the moment the spell announced its appraisal. Cassie shook her head slightly. "But that is all right. Even if I don't return, fallen grace will live on. It has been protected by me and my sisters for a long time, but nothing lasts forever in this world. A time will come when there will be no Sibyls left in the tomb of Ariel. A time will come when there will be no outsiders left either. Only the river people will remain. That is you. You must carry the torch of humanity into the future with or without me. You must persevere, endure, and thrive." She paused for a moment, then added, her voice growing harsher. "That is what I expect from you all. Don't disappoint me." Hearing her words, the Riverborn gathered in the temple looked down with solemn expressions. Sunny sighed. The spell was a cruel thing indeed. It threw them into nightmares and tasked them with changing fate, but what they strived to change was just an illusion. It would have been great if they were in the real tomb of Ariel, changing the lives of real people. But sadly, time and fate did not work that way. What had happened was set in stone and could not be changed. Not by mortals like them, and not in a nightmare. Or at least not in a third nightmare. While the chain breaker was receiving light repairs, the members of the cohort were left to their own devices. Those who had never been to Fallen Grace spent time exploring its island ships and getting to know the locals. Cassie was busy arranging things for when she was gone. Sunny did not really want to look at the beautiful city of eternal dusk. It made him wistful, and so he threw himself back into weaving, knowing that there was not much time left. He did, however, continue to observe the blind girl through one of his shadows, out of habit more than anything else. By now, since she had never done anything to confirm the accusations made by the Sin of Solace in the past 2 months. He also sent one of his shadows to keep an eye on Mordred. Sunny was certain that Cassie was doing the same. As well, the Prince of Nothing could not be trusted to be on his best behavior in a city full of people, especially people who were inhabitants of a nightmare, and therefore no different from his countless victims in the Kingdom of Hope. But Mordred did not seem inclined to go on a massacre in Fallen Grace. In fact, he was mostly interested in its myths and legends, of all things, spending his days talking to people on the streets and listening to their stories. The people seemed to enjoy his company. On the 3rd day of their stay in the last human city, Sunny successfully altered the transcendent arrow memory Nephi's had earned in Twilight, elevating its rank to supreme. The onerous process of transplanting a new nexus and reinforcing the weave to withstand it left him drained and fatigued. So, Sonny decided to let himself rest and left the temple, eventually finding his way to the edge of the island ship. Sitting down there, he observed the busy canals of fallen grace and allowed his tired mind to rest. It was not long after that when Kronos found him, brimming with endless curiosity, just like always. Today, however, the teenagers at least tried to keep it in check. Noticing his strange behavior, Sonny raised his eyebrow and asked, "What's on your mind?" The young man hesitated for a while, but eventually asked, "Lord Sunless, I heard that you won't be returning from Verge. Is it true?" Sonny looked at him, frowning a little. Then he looked away and sighed. "Sure, we aren't planning to die, mind you. It's just that we are outsiders. Once the defilement is destroyed, it's back to the outside for us." Kronos seemed saddened by that response. He stared at the water dejectedly. "What is it like, really? The world outside Ariel's tomb. What are you going to do after leaving here?" Sonny blinked a couple of times. Indeed, what would he do after leaving the nightmare? He had no idea. It was hard to tell, considering that the state of Antarctica and the waking world in general was entirely unknown. The war between valor and song would probably grow more intense. The nightmare gates would continue to pop into existence, slowly consuming the waking world and making it a part of the dream realm. No matter how much Sonny wanted to simply live a good life, he knew that these events would not let him remain a bystander. After a few moments of silence, he shrugged. "Well, it's more or less the same. There is no defilement, but there is still corruption. Nightmare creatures are running around devouring people, so awakened like me need to keep them in check. So I'll probably be battling some hideous abomination every other day, cursing loudly. That's life for you. The secret to a happy life, though, is to do all these things in good company. Oh, and in a place with good plumbing." He glanced at the teenager and smiled. "Why, what are you going to do after we get rid of the defilement? Are you really going to the House of Youth?" Kronos laughed awkwardly. "Well, I will eventually, but probably not just yet." He looked into the distance, at the bustling streets of fallen grace, and sighed. "In truth, I've been sensing my soul essence recently, a bit. So I'll probably work on forming a soul core and becoming an awakened. Even if you and the other lords and ladies defeat the first seeker and vanquish the defilement, there will still be corrupted creatures left, threatening our city. Someone has to defend it after you leave." Kronos smiled. "Plus, I've always been interested in how the city works. All these people, all these moving parts. It's a bit of a miracle that a place like Fallen Grace can exist, don't you think? Lady Dusk has always been taking care of us. What are we going to do without her?" His eyes turned cloudy for a moment, but then shone brightly once again. Wiping them, he smiled again. "I want to make sure that Fallen Grace continues to exist and thrive just like she told us to. For myself, my wife, and our future children. But I'm just some brat. So I figured I should become really strong first. Like you, Lord Sunless. So that people had no choice but to listen to what I had to say." Sonny looked at him incredulously. Kronos was indeed just some brat. But all great people whose deeds shaped history had been brats once. Would this kid become a great leader one day? Would his actions shape the future of Fallen Grace and create a world where his children could grow up safe and happy? Would the stories of his deeds become legends one day? Or would he disappear without a trace once the nightmare was complete? Sonny forced himself to smile. "Strong like me? Brat, do you think people actually listen to what I have to say? Stronger, become much stronger than me. Then they'll listen." With that, he patted the teenager on the shoulder and rose to his feet. The charm memory waited to be altered. The day of their departure from Fallen Grace was drawing near. "Stronger than you, my lord, but no, that's just unreasonable." Sonny looked at the startled youth with a smile, then shook his head and headed away. "Then be unreasonable." Imparting Kronos with that piece of questionable wisdom, He returned to the temple and spent a few sleepless hours going over his plans for altering the transcendent charm. He felt that he had already accounted for everything that could go wrong, so he would probably be ready to start the process once his essence was replenished by the crown of twilight. Just when the night fell, however, something distracted him from the preparations. After wasting its time for months, the shadow that had been following Cassie finally noticed something strange about her movements. Sunny was in his quarters, going over the plan for altering the transcendent charm. Outside, fallen Grace was bathed in the beautiful glow of the iridescent water. The short night had descended on the world, shrouding the sky in absolute darkness. In that dark hour, Cassie was walking along the corridors of the temple, which wasn't that strange in and of itself, if not for the fact that she was alone. Usually, the two deaf guards would be following behind her, but they were nowhere to be seen. The only thing accompanying the blind girl was the shadow Sunny had sent to keep an eye on her. Back in his quarters, he straightened and frowned, distracted from envisioning the complicated tapestry of the charm's spellweave. What is she up to? Cassie had not given him any reason to feel worried in these past 2 months. Honestly, monitoring her movements was an afterthought by now. Sunny had certainly hoped that it would remain that way. Feeling a bit somber, he glanced at the motionless figure standing a few meters away. The Sin of Solace was staring at him silently, not bothering to say anything. However, his gaze expressed more than enough. Sunny winced, then looked away. "Don't you glare at me, I'm sure it's nothing." He said that, but did not command the shadow to back away. Instead, he dedicated more of his attention to observing Cassie. The blind girl certainly did not seem pensive or secretive. She calmly walked along the winding stone corridors, tracing her fingers on the wall. Her other hand was holding the leather-bound journal. Maybe her guards are asleep. Sunny returned to considering the weave, while keeping an eye on Cassie. She walked for quite some time, eventually entering the part of the temple that he was not familiar with. These chambers were used for preparing for public rituals, so Sunny had no business being there. Cassie, on the other hand, seemed very familiar with that area of the temple. She made a few more turns and stopped in front of an unassuming wooden door. A mundane-looking key appeared in her hand. Unlocking the door, Cassie entered a narrow staircase that led down, spiraling. Sunny's frown deepened. What the hell? She was already on the first floor of the temple. Why was there a way further down, into the frame of the island ship? But then again, maybe it was normal. The human cities on the Great River were kept in place by various means, ranging from sails and wind catchers to sorcerous mechanisms. Perhaps Cassie was on her way to inspect the moving parts of one such mechanism. She descended the stairs for some time before entering a dark and damp network of service tunnels running under the temple. Sunny had not known that there were such corridors there, but it made sense. The mechanisms responsible for allowing the island ship to resist the current had to be inspected and repaired from time to time. Fallen Grace, especially, was reliant on such mechanisms. It was situated not too far from the edge, after all, and so the pull of the current was more powerful here. Cassie walked along the dark corridors for a little bit and unlocked another door, entering a small chamber. Sunny was suddenly unable to concentrate on weaving anymore. His face darkened. The chamber was just what he had expected it to be. It housed a complicated mess of gears and chains that spun and moved, transferring the energy from the wind and the enchantment circuits into the underwater wheels that kept the island ship stationary. It was a bit like entering the insides of a tower clock, if that tower clock had been built with the help of sorcery. In a sense, Sunny was looking at the river civilization's version of spelltech. However, that was not what attracted his attention. The chamber and the intricate gears were what he had been expecting to see. What he had not expected, however, was that the floor of the chamber was broken, creating a rough, circular well. The menacing hole certainly did not look like something that had been planned by the builders of the temple. Instead, it looked like something that had been created much later, and much more violently. He could hear the sounds of flowing water coming from its dark depths. Why is there a well at the bottom of the Temple of Dusk? His shadow hid in the darkness of the underground chamber, observing Cassie carefully. The blind girl did not seem surprised by the presence of the strange well. Neither did she pay it any attention. Locking the door behind her, she circled around the open chasm and approached the opposite wall of the chamber. There, hidden behind a throng of spinning gears, a simple desk stood near the wall, with several chests and cabinets surrounding it. The underground chamber was absolutely dark, and there were no lanterns anywhere in sight. Of course, Cassie had no need for them. Coming closer to the desk, she lingered for a few moments, facing it with a distant expression. Then she moved past it and kneeled near one of the chests, placing a hand on its heavy lid. Several strings of runes ignited on the wooden surface, and the chest opened noiselessly, revealing what was stored inside it. Sonny tilted his head, his expression turning somber. Inside the chest were leather-bound journals, just like the one Cassie was carrying. Dozens of them, or maybe even hundreds. There were several chests like that one in the underground chamber as well, all locked with sorcerous locks. The blind girl remained motionless for a while, then sighed deeply and placed the last journal on the pile. Then she closed the lid of the chest, kept her hand on it for a few moments and rose. Turning away, she approached the edge of the dark well and lowered her head, listening to the sounds of the flowing water with a distant expression. Cassie stood there for several minutes, unmoving. Separated from her by hundreds of meters and numerous stone walls, Sonny grew tense, ready to step through the shadows and appear in the underground chamber should something reach for the blind girl from the cold darkness. What the hell is that place? Did Dusk leave those things behind? It would make sense for the Sibyl who had lived in the temple for centuries to leave many traces here, including her personal records. However, what was with the ominous well leading to the dark waters? Sonny gritted his teeth. But in the end, nothing happened. Cassie clenched her fists, turned away from the underground well, and left the chamber the way she came. Ascending the narrow steps, she re-entered the temple proper and traced her way back to her quarters, entering them through a private passage. It was only then that Sonny allowed his tense body to relax. His mind, however, was anything but calm. Why would Dusk have a secret like that? He hesitated for a while, then felt a cold chill run down his spine. Or does it have nothing to do with Dusk at all? The feeling of restlessness Sonny had felt after leaving Twilight returned. Something strange was going on with Cassie, had been going on for a long time maybe. He was almost sure of it. But it was the almost of it all that made the situation so difficult. He did not know what to do, confront her, share his concern with others. What would he say? That Cassie should not have survived Twilight. None of them should have survived there, really. That she kept journals. There was nothing wrong with that, and claiming otherwise would only make him seem strange. That she was too quiet and unassuming, which made him feel as if she was hiding something vital from them. That sounded like paranoia talking. In fact, it was the sin of Solace whispering into his ear. The sin of Solace, whose only purpose was to drive him mad. Was he a fool to listen to these whispers? Sonny was not even sure himself what he was suspecting Cassie of, just that he did not feel comfortable with her secrets. But was it really because there was something off about the blind girl, or was it simply because he had never trusted her? Was he still secretly holding on to the grudge after what she had done on the Forgotten Shore, which painted his perception of her? Sonny would be lying if he said that he had let go of that grudge completely. None of the others seemed to suspect Cassie of anything, so why was he the only one looking for faults in her actions? Ah, damnation! What was he supposed to do? Did he even need to do anything? So what if Cassie had a pile of old journals? So what if she kept secrets? Was he the right person to blame someone for not being entirely honest? More than that, he had always known that Cassie kept much of what she knew to herself. In fact, Sonny was the reason why she had closed herself off. To begin with, he was the one who had told her how destructive of a poison her visions were, in the most cruel way he could think of at that. Her personality had only begun to change after that bitter conversation they had in the medical complex of the academy, right after coming back from the Forgotten Shore. Nephi's was aware that Cassie knew much more than she was letting on to. She had told him so herself, during one of their conversations on the Ivory Island. So why was Sonny reacting so strongly now? Because we are so close to victory. Because this nightmare was so dreadful, and its end was swiftly approaching. Sonny was nervous that something would ruin their chances of returning to the waking world, and the ominous shadow of torment was the last thing standing between them and salvation. Torment had never appeared before them, and so she was as frightening as their imaginations could make her. Perhaps Cassie was just a substitute for all that fear. Or perhaps there was really something ominous going on with the blind seer. Oh, she is definitely planning to betray you, again. The Sin of Solace smiled, looking at him with dark amusement. Sonny cursed and threw a wooden tray at the sword wraith. The tray passed through the apparition and fell to the floor, clattering loudly. The hateful wraith laughed. Fool, you are simply incapable of learning, are you? Even after what she did to you, what she took from you, you are still willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. No wonder you ended up being made a slave by her. Ah, and she never even apologized. I bet she doesn't feel even a little bit remorseful about her betrayal. Since she doesn't, what is going to stop her from turning on you again? Sonny glared at the Sin of Solace, then took a deep breath. He slowly calmed down. That doesn't even make any sense. At least try to be convincing when you are spouting nonsense, will you? Sonny was prejudiced against Cassie, that much was apparent. Deep in his heart, he still harbored resentment toward her. He valued and cared for her as well, but that was beside the point. Humans were complicated and contradictory creatures, indeed. Just like Nephi's had said, they could love and hate someone at the same time. Because Sonny's judgment was clouded, it was easy to find fault with Cassie. But if he flipped his perception and looked at the situation from a different angle, trying to find the opposite, any suspicion that the blind girl could have been doing something to harm the cohort would crumble. It was a preposterous idea. Almost every action Cassie had taken was for their benefit. They would have never made it that far without her. From start to finish, she had been nothing but a selfless ally, putting herself in harm's way on numerous occasions. Finding the scattered members of the cohort, escaping Alethia's island, surviving the depths of the great river, none of that would have been possible without her. So no matter what secret Cassie was keeping, it was not something that would harm the cohort. Sonny had no reason to worry about that. After realizing that, he felt his heart calming down. But then it suddenly felt heavy once again. Because while Sonny did not have a reason to worry about the cohort, there might have been a reason to worry about Cassie. She's not preparing herself for something drastic, is she? A deep scowl appeared on his face once again. He remained silent for a while, then shook his head. No, she wouldn't. Cassie might seem soft, but she is one of the strongest people I know. She's much stronger than anyone gives her credit for. Still, a tiny seed of doubt remained. Sonny cursed quietly, threw a hateful glance at the Sin of Solace, and turned his attention back to the transcendent charm. The day of their departure was swiftly approaching, so he had to perform the alteration as soon as possible. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.